Okay, we'll start with this. Tszyu and how the show will go on. Back-to-back losses at this level are obviously a long way from ideal. Ben Damon of Fox Sports main event told Boxing Scene it would have been seen by some as sensible to take an easier fight, not a somewhat mysterious world champion like Murtazaliev, particularly coming off that bloody loss to Fundora. And everyone would agree with that now, with the benefit of hindsight. The fact is, because of how big a star Tim's become, lower-level fights could have sold really well and done significant business for main event and No Limit, without the same level of risk, but that's just not who Tszyu is, to his detriment. He always wants the hardest fights, and he's drawn towards the risk. They took that risk because they wanted to shoot for the stars. And of course, a loss was a real blow, but it's not the end of the world. Australian boxing won't be throwing in the towel. Tim will remain a star in Australia, and his next fight will be a significant fight regardless. There's a matchup that probably needs to happen at some point between one of the Tszyu brothers, Tim or Nikita, and Michael Zarafa. That's a huge domestic fight, and Zarafa has made himself the bad guy in Australian boxing, so that's the obvious fight for Tim now. It's a great rebound fight. In spite of everything, I think Tim can win it. But who knows if he will want to do the obvious thing. Ultimately, it's Tim's call, but he's not going to stop being a huge name in Australia and a star in the Aussie sporting market because of these losses. There will be huge interest in what moves he makes next. Michael Zarafa, unlike Tszyu, is little known beyond Australia, has already claimed that they are negotiating a fight, potentially because of the knowledge that had Tszyu defeated Murtazaliev without enduring a significant injury, he planned to make the first defense of his title in Sydney between Christmas Day and New Year's Eve. Needless to say, those plans have changed now. Tim won't be returning at the end of this year. He needs time off. In the end, a fight for which he was considered the favorite became what retired Sean Porter, commentating from ringside as he described the one-sided beatdown. Those invested in Tszyu may have admired his reckless bravery, the determination to force a knockdown so soon after suffering the first, that he so quickly returned to his feet instead of taking his time to recover, as much as they'd felt frustrated by his tactics and naivety. Tszyu appeared to believe that he could walk Murtazaliev down, and it was reported post-fight that his corner had instructed him to avoid taking risks during the opening stanza. He once may have been accused of attempting to impress his father. That is one thing that was different about this fight than most other Tszyu fights. Kostya, his father, was there, and Kostya, he hadn't been at a Tszyu fight since Tim's debut. The rest of the time, he wasn't there. This time he was. Tim has been fighting as a headliner on pay-per-view since he won the Australian title against Joe Camilleri in 2019, and he steadily built into being a huge pay-per-view draw in Australia. So naturally there's a lot of interest and investment from No Limit, from Tszyu and his team, and from Main Event and Fox Sports, in getting as many eyeballs as possible in front of everything that happens in the build-up to a fight, and particularly during fight week. To get the best possible result, Damon continued, that's the nature of promotion of a fighter and an event. It's fair to assume that Tim would probably not have had the springboard at an early stage of his career without that surname. But he did still have to win the fights, and he got himself to a level where he's been able to emerge, in Australia at least, out of Kostya's shadow. I mean, Tszyu, he's no Julio Cesar Chavez Jr. He's no Chris Eubank Jr. I don't file him in the same file cabinet as those fighters whose famous fathers they owe a lot of success to. That without their surname, they wouldn't have amounted to much just based on ability or their records alone, whereas Tim, even without being a Tszyu, even without his surname, fighting the way that he was fighting, at the rate that he was fighting, against who he was fighting, he would have still been a big draw in Australia. Of course, being the son of Tszyu helped. Of course, it helped. But it also helped that he came up against some really good fighters, some really good guys, and he beat them in dominant fashion. Internationally, Tszyu still has a great impact on how Tim is received, and he has probably received enhanced opportunities in America because of the path that Tszyu blazed. But it can't be doubted that he's doing his own thing, and has been doing it very, very well. Tim is really his own man, and has become his own star. Tszyu was adopted and made an absolute darling by the Australian public because of the way that he fought, and how exciting his style was, and the great success he had in becoming champion. But also because of the way he carried himself outside of the ring. He had an accent and a unique demeanor that really endeared him to the Australian sporting public, and he became a real mainstream star through those times. So of course, that surname holds a lot of weight. Nepotism aside, Tim is once again on the bounce. If it were up to me to strategize a recovery plan for Tim Tszyu that would ensure his chances of success moving forward, at least improve them, I would abandon ship at 154 if I were Tim Tszyu. I would move up to middleweight. Not as deep a division, not as talked about. Doesn't get the same attention that junior middleweight is getting right now, but perhaps that's what Tim needs, to take his foot off the gas a bit and slow things down. You go up to middleweight, you get a head start on all those guys at 154 because they're going to end up at 160 anyway. They're not going to stay there forever. Sooner or later, they're going to move up. When they do, you want to be established. You want to be situated, settled. You go to 160. 3-fight plan for the coming calendar year that Tim Tszyu should fight 3 times. All 3 in Australia. Forget about the international scene, at least for the immediate future.
Go back.
Back to the beginning. Back to where it all started.
Go back.
3 fights. 4 if they can squeeze it in. Squeeze it all into one calendar year. The first fight would so obviously be the Michael Zarafa fight as soon as possible. In spite of everything that happened, I'm still 100% sure that Tim can beat that guy. The focus of his next fight has to be putting distance between his last one and his next one. Get back in the winner's bracket. Remind yourself what you can do and what that feels like. If he wins, and I think he would, then you fight New Zealand's own Andre Mikhailiovic, who was just in there with Yanni Bekalam-Kanalai. That's a tough kid, and that makes for a great fight. He'd have to work a little harder in that one. Though being honest with you, the Mikhailiovic kid is a shit boxer. I mean, his skills are shit. He's tough, and he's durable, and he means well, but he's not a good fighter. Tim is a better boxer than this guy. As stated, he would have to work a little harder in that one, because Andre Mikhailiovic is durable. He's a stubborn guy. I think Tim beats him, but he would have to work for it. Then when he does, you move on to somebody a little bit more international. You reshift your focus over to Erickson Lubricant. That piece of shit? For what? You want somebody international after the first 2 to provide Tim those assurances that he is still a world-level fighter and that his success is not limited to the domestic scene. Now, this would be at 160, not 154, and this would be several months from now, because several months from now, who knows if Erickson Lubin's still going to be at 154. And if you can't get that chinny, talkative piece of shit, maybe you target Canada's Stephen Butler, or maybe Kyron Davis. Somebody international. This is the ideal sequence of fights. I read a comment on one of my other videos that it's hard to imagine that anybody other than Igor would be in Tim Tszyu's corner. Igor, his uncle. But remember this. Tim Tszyu was considering relocating from Sydney over to Las Vegas, and I wonder, was Igor going to relocate with him? He was going to come with him? Move to America? So before the loss to Bakram, we saw Tim pour a lot of energy, a lot of effort in immersing himself in America, rubbing elbows with the Americans. I didn't think that was necessary before, but it might be now. He needs extra. Said it in my previous video, not just for what he can take away from a new trainer or a new situation, but for his psychology. The assurance that you're doing things a little differently now, so that what happened before doesn't happen again. He's an offensively minded fighter, and with that in mind, I would make the recommendation that he go with
Robert Garcia, Manny Robles,
Freddie Roach if he can, because for an offensively minded fighter, these are good guys to go to. They can sharpen you up.
bitch.
He needs something extra. Even if it's not one of them, even if it's somebody else.
He needs extra.
Got hit with that left hook way too many times. There's holes that need patching up. It was jarring to see how many times he got floored by that same punch when he protected himself so much better against Takeshi Inoue and Brian Mendoza that he should be caught with the same punch over and over against Bakram. That kid's eyes weren't on the ball.
They better be now.
It's gonna take time. It's gonna take a while to rebuild him. If he's got his head and his heart in the right place, he can come back from this, but it's gonna take time. It's not as simple as just winning 1 or 2 rebound fights, winning a few fights. It's also learning from his mistakes, learning from what got him beat in the first place. Men's heavyweight news, Andy Lee says there will be fewer voices and greater clarity in Tyson's corner on December 21st. If Fury is better prepared for the rematch at the same venue, according to his assistant trainer and second cousin, Andy Lee, he retains what is required to become the first to defeat the 37-year-old Usyk in their fight for the WBC, WBA, and WBO titles and the coveted Ring Magazine belt. There were a lot of voices in the corner. We were in a dire situation and had to get him back to himself, Lee told Boxing Scene. Pull him out of it. I was told and I believed he was 2 rounds down, so I had to speak up about that. His dad was giving him great advice. I thought,
Yeah, but who's training him? Sugar Hill Stewart or his dad?
his dad was giving him great advice, I thought, but he's also a dad and that's his son. Sugar should have been the only voice, and he will be the only voice in the next fight. When you lose, you're open to criticism, but it shows Tyson trusts his team, that he doesn't want to change. A lot of guys would have looked for an excuse, blamed it on the team, but he's not changing his team. Hopefully it works out for him. He's pragmatic about losing for the first time. It was very close, the first fight. I've got to be better. I've got to concentrate more, and I'll win the rematch. It's as simple as that, really. Obviously, it's not as simple as that doing it, but saying it is. Sugar should always be the only voice, really, but we've all got these relationships with Tyson. This is his dad, and it's his son, and he's going to say what he feels his son should do. No one's going to stop a dad from advising his son in the biggest fight of his career. We might all be talking again at some stage. Who knows what will happen, but there's been no conversation about to resolve what happened previously. Me and Sugar talked about it. I said, Sugar, I'm sorry, but I had to speak up during those last 2 rounds. I thought he was down on the cards, so I thought he had to win rounds. And Sugar said, Andy, it's okay. If someone tells me and I believe them that he's down on the cards, I'll have to tell him because you're duty-bound, honor-bound. When you're in a fight that close, you don't know how it's going. But if you're unequivocally down on the cards, you need a knockout or to win those last few rounds, you should be told.
So much is made of the chaos in Tyson Fury's corner, but I don't feel like that chaos erupted until he was hurt, until he was ragdolled by Usyk in the mid-rounds.
I feel like that's when the chaos erupted, and I feel like that's when everybody panicked, when everybody starts shouting instructions at Tyson Fury all at once. And when you look at it that way,
Was it really the corner situation that costed him the fight?
my confidence has taken a knock, said Andy Lee. I would say that, but I believe in Tyson. If anyone can turn this around, it would be him, because he's an incredible fighter, incredible person. He's overcome so much that this isn't even the biggest battle he's ever faced. He's probably had harder fights, bigger challenges in boxing, and he's had much bigger challenges in life. So this will be nothing for him. He needs to be fitter. He probably needs to be heavier. He couldn't be fitter for the first one because he had a cut eye. He couldn't spar. He will be better in the rematch if he doesn't get cut or injured. But is he on the decline? Is he getting too old? Or does he just need to get fitter?
Define fitter, because you're talking about him walking in heavier than he did. Would him walking in heavier, that would make him fitter?
I want to see Tyson in training, in camp, sparring, going through the rounds, doing 10 rounds regularly in sparring. Then my confidence will build as we go through the camp. That's how you gain confidence, from training hard, pushing yourself, going to the depths. That's where it's built.
So that's essentially saying that Andy isn't all that confident right now.
I think not being able to consistently spar made a huge difference, because you saw come round 9, he was gassed, Lee continued. When you spar, when you build your fitness, you can do all your punching, all the training, all the pads, all the running you want. Until you spar, you're not fit. It's a different fitness. Boxing fitness is different. That was a huge hindrance to him, not being able to spar. He didn't want to pull out, not just because of the money, the millions that he was at risk of being fined, but because of pride as well. He canceled the fight once and it was a massive decision. He wanted to go ahead, the fight with the cut, but he took advice and rescheduled the fight. It wasn't because of the money though, it was just pride, because he didn't want to look like he's running.
Sure, Andy, sure.
The defeat was the way it had to be. You just become philosophical about it. The cut had to happen, and he had to take the fight and go ahead with it under the circumstances. But it makes a nice little story for the rematch. If he has a full camp, he'll be a lot better. It's a nice character arc for him. All of the trials and tribulations in and outside of the ring, overcoming those.
Andy talks about Tyson Fury gassing out. He talks about him getting tired in round 9. He says it's because he couldn't really spar after he got cut.
And that might seem like an adequate explanation if not for Alexander Usyk's track record. What's consistent with Alexander Usyk's fights and what happens to his opponents? They get tired. They gas out.
The pace he sets for a fight is usually more than they can keep up with, and eventually it gets to them. Because in the land of the big men, there are not that many, if any, other guys that are as fleet of foot and prolific within a round as Usyk.
So when what happened to everybody else happens to Fury, they offer up all these explanations. Oh, it's because of the cut, because he couldn't spar, because of this and because of that. When it could just be as simple as, he's the one who wore you out. He's the one that made you tired. Andy Lee continued all the trials and tribulations inside and outside of the ring, overcoming those, becoming the greatest heavyweight of the last however many years, suffering his only loss, and then coming back and defeating the only guy who beat him. It's a great story. It's already a great story. Tyson Fury. But it's going to be even better when he wins. I don't know if privately he's different, but to me, he's just said, Andy, I lost. It was a close fight. I know what I have to do in a rematch, and I'll win. He's brushed it off, and he's fortunate to be in the position he is. He's got an immediate rematch, and he's got a chance to set the record straight. But it doesn't seem to have affected him at all. He needs to be fitter. He needs to be able to concentrate for longer. No breaks. Don't need to take breaks mid-fight. He needs to push Usyk back. Usyk was very dominant on the forward foot. Tyson needs to push him back. Both of them are enigmas. Usyk was extremely good in the first fight, but how much better can he be? I'm not sure. How much better can Tyson Fury be? I know he can be a lot better. I think Usyk will be better, but I'm not sure how much more. I know Tyson will be a lot better.
Seeing Tyson Fury in rematch situations where he came back and won in more dominant fashion in the John McDermott fight, the Chisora fights,
the Wilder fights, but none of those guys are Alexander Usyk. They don't offer up the same challenges that he does. In a rematch situation, usually it's the guy who can adapt, the guy who can change, that wins the rematch, irrespective of what happened in the first fight. But they're both capable of doing that, both Usyk and Fury, because they're both cerebral.
This might boil down to professionalism. Habits.
Hearing Andy Lee talk about the rematch, it sounds like they don't really quite have a fix on what they want Tyson Fury to do. That's not encouraging. All this talk about less voices in the corner, less chaos, when that's not what got you hurt anyway.
And perhaps coming in heavier, all that might do is slow you down.
Seems like Team Fury are hard-pressed for answers ahead of this rematch.